Hey, good morning, everyone. We are coming to you live from Baltimore Inner Harbor, about an hour outside of Washington, D.C. And this morning we were talking about the structure that I'm standing on. It's a floating structure called Mr. Trash Wheel. Now, the locals know all about it, but visitors like you or I, we're not sure what this is. This is actually the conveyor belt that brings up the trash, which we'll learn about in a second. I'm joined by the inventor now, John Kellett, who basically invented this. Tell me, why did you see the need to create Mr. Trash Wheel?
Well, Baltimore has a beautiful harbor, but one of the things that people see when they come to it, or did see when they visited Baltimore Harbor, was a lot of trash floating around the harbor. And most of that trash doesn't come from people walking around the harbor and throwing their trash in. It comes from the streets, the alleys, the parking lots, upriver. And this river that we're on is called the Jones Falls River. It drains about a third of Baltimore City. So when it rains, all that trash that is on the ground in the streets, like I just talked about, gets flushed down the storm drains and into the small creeks and then into the Jones Falls River and down here. So after a rain, we just see tremendous amounts of trash coming into the harbor and just sort of ruining the experience of the harbor. You didn't see the beautiful harbor, you saw the trash. So we decided we had to do something about it, and this is what we came up with.
Now, if you've been to the Baltimore Inner Harbor and you see Jones Falls River, you could see that there's not as much trash as there was when you first started this project. How much trash have you collected, has Mr. Trash Wheel collected?
Over 1.2 million pounds of trash, and that's a lot of trash. It's enough trash that that fill the harbor completely if it had been out there and hadn't been collected. So it's an incredible amount of trash.
From what I read, you've collected over about 9 million cigarette butts.
Yep, cigarette butts are one of the most common things we see floating down the river and coming into the harbor. We also see a lot of plastic bottles, styrofoam cups, drinking straws, all kinds of trash that comes down here. And the machine picks it up when it gets here before it gets out in the harbor, which is a very efficient way to do it because we're basically at the most concentrated place for the trash. Any further upstream, you've got lots of little tributaries you have to deal with. Any further downstream, and you're out in the harbor where it disperses and goes all over the place. So this is the most concentrated place to pick it up.
And behind us is the Chesapeake Bay.
That's Baltimore Harbor, which feeds into the Chesapeake Bay, and then the Chesapeake Bay feeds out into the Atlantic Ocean. So one of the big things that you're hearing more and more about these days is plastics pollution in the ocean. And a lot of that plastics, almost all of that plastic, comes from land-based sources and gets washed down rivers and into the bays and then out into the ocean. So we're stopping it before it gets out into the ocean. So it's not just an aesthetic thing. It's also a very important environmental issue that once it gets out into the ocean or even just out into the bay, it causes tremendous damage to the environment out there, to the marine life and everything else that uses the water.
And, you've said you've collected plastic bottles, cigarette butts. How do you keep track of every little nugget that you collect?
Well, we do sampling. And the conveyor actually moves pretty slowly, but it can carry 1,000 pounds at a time. So that allows us the opportunity to look at what's coming up the conveyor. So when we have a rainstorm, which is when we get most of the trash coming down, well, virtually all of the trash is carried by stormwater runoff. So when we have a storm event, we look at what's on each paddle of the conveyor for a while. We take a sample, we count the number of plastic bottles, the number of cigarette butts, and then we time how long it takes to fill the dumpster. And when the dumpster's full, we know a pretty good estimation of how many plastic bottles, styrofoam cups, and cigarette butts and other things are in that. Plastic bags are one of the big things that we get. So we have a pretty good estimate. Now it's, the count of styrofoam and plastic is a good approximation. It's not like we count every last one that goes into the dumpster, but we have a pretty good sample and we know what's going into that dumpster.
What I love about this is that it's eco-friendly. It's old technology meeting new. It's not a gas-guzzling diesel engine up there. You're using solar panels and actually the river's current to power these conveyor belts. So can you kind of show us how this all works?
The water wheel is the engine of the trash wheel, and the water wheel gets its power from two sources. One is the flow of the river. When we have a storm event, this river gets flowing pretty well, and that helps turn the wheel. And as the wheel turns, we convey the power through the shaft and the chains and belts and pulleys to the conveyor, and the conveyor is powered by that turning of the water wheel, as well as the rake system, which helps push the trash up onto the conveyor. And we've combined, that's very old technology, we've combined that with some solar power, so when it's not flowing like it isn't today on a sunny day, we're able to pump water up into the buckets of the water wheel. The weight of the water turns the water wheel. So the machine's always getting its power from the water wheel. It just depends on whether it's the flow of the river or the solar-powered pumps that are powering the water wheel. That solar power also allows us some new technology, which is to the internet connections and the cameras that allow us to monitor and control the machine without being out here. So if we have trash in front of it, we can see it on our camera. I can turn it on from my smartphone anywhere in the world. And
Now, did you create this app, or is this something we could all download and we could do it ourselves?
it's kind of an off-the-shelf app, and we have a little. It's really an internet control board that's available on Amazon or someplace, and I can go on my phone and I can click on the switches, and
So it looks like a little switchboard. It has on-off buttons, about 7 or 8 of them in a row that turn on different.
9 pumps on it, and I can control all 9 pumps. And as you can see, when I kick it on, it starts pumping water up into the buckets of the water wheel, and the water wheel starts to turn. It's the weight of the water being pumped by the solar panels that allow it to turn, to provide the power to turn the conveyor. And as you can see, the conveyor is starting to move. The little trash that's here will eventually get swept up by the rakes up onto the conveyor. And then the conveyor picks it out of the water and puts it into a dumpster. That dumpster is on a separate floating barge, and we actually have 4 of those. And when one's full, we're able to bring an empty one out, pull the full one out from underneath the conveyor, put an empty one in, take the full one to a boat ramp where a truck comes and gives us another empty one, so we can keep rotating dumpsters through. After a big storm event, we'll fill a dumpster every hour and a half, 2 hours. And we've done as many as 12 in one day after one rainstorm. We actually had one rainstorm that brought us 15 dumpsters, and that was 53 tons of trash from one rainstorm. It took us about 36 hours to get it all picked up, and it was 15 dumpsters. So it can pick up about 25 tons a day, 25 to 40 tons a day, depending on what the consistency of the trash is.
So the amount of trash that you collect is really the amount based on the weather. If you've got big rainfall, it comes from the streets, streams, and it all collects into the Jones Falls rivers, comes down right through here.
Right. If we have a really hard rainstorm, that's when the streets get flushed, and that's what brings us all the trash. If you have a light rainstorm that lasts all day, you may get a lot of rain in inches, but it won't bring a lot of trash. But if you get a hard rainstorm, like one of these summertime thunderstorms, that's when the streets will really get washed and rinsed off of trash, and it all comes down to us.
So your original plan, original creation for this is because you worked on the harbor for about 20 years, and you would always hear people walking by saying, "Oh, there's so much trash in the harbor," and you said, "You know what? I got to do something after 20 years. I love this place. This is my home. I need to do something for my community and give back." This is your way of giving back with Mr. Trash.
Correct. I've always, working on Baltimore Harbor, I've always felt that, we have such a beautiful harbor, and it's really a shame that people the first thing they see is trash. And I used to cross this footbridge across the river every day, and every day I'd had a first-hand view, particularly after it rained, of the trash coming down into the harbor and making a mess. And I actually called the city and said, we need to do something about the fact that trash is the first impression of our harbor. And the city said, we're open to ideas, which is great to have a city that's open to new ways of approaching a problem. And I came up with this idea. I built a little working model, showed it to them, and I enlisted the help of a local foundation to build a prototype. And since then, we've been able to make a tremendous difference, I believe, here in the harbor. We've also got a second one in the harbor because of this success, and we're working on a third.
And you said Miss Professor Trashwheel is on the other side of the harbor?
Yep, Professor Trashwheel, which is a female trash wheel, I guess. I don't have much to do with that. The Waterfront Partnership is a great partner who's actually sponsored these projects, came up with the names and the details, the personification of the trash wheel.
And you also have a crowdfunding one going on with the state of Baltimore?
Well, we actually have a third trash wheel being funded by the Maryland Port Administration that's going to be happening soon.
Great. And, there's not much coming up right now because obviously you're doing a good job, but what are some of the most unusual things that you've collected?
Well, we actually collected somebody's pet python one time. It's not a water snake, it's a land snake, and it's not native to Maryland. So we knew it was somebody's pet. And it actually came up the conveyor, was able to climb off the conveyor and around over there on top of our control box. And with the help of the National Aquarium, we rescued that python, and it was adopted by a good home.
Well, I'm glad that wasn't today because I'm petrified of snakes. But if you'd like to learn more about Mr. Trash Wheel, you can follow him on Twitter at Mr. Trash Wheel. There's also a couple live cameras where you could watch his good deed in action. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you. Nice to
Thank you for cleaning up your community, doing a good deed, seeing the good deed.